The morning at the military training base began like any other, with soldiers lined up, engines humming in the background, and officers moving from one task to another. But that routine changed the moment a heavy combat vehicle failed to start. The engine, usually reliable, refused to respond no matter how many times it was tested. Thick smoke rose briefly and then disappeared, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. Mechanics were called in one by one, each more experienced than the last. They opened panels, checked wires, adjusted parts, and tried again. Nothing worked. The engine stayed silent, as if it had decided to challenge everyone standing around it. Soon, the problem reached the ears of a senior general, a man known for his strict discipline, sharp tongue, and long years of service. He arrived at the scene with several high-ranking officers following him. His presence alone made everyone stand straighter. The general walked slowly around the vehicle, looking at the engine with a mix of irritation and disbelief. This machine was supposed to represent strength and reliability. Its failure, especially during inspection hours, felt embarrassing. The mechanics explained what they had tried so far. They spoke carefully, using technical terms, hoping the general would understand the complexity of the issue. But the general's patience was already wearing thin. He had seen many engines fail before, and in his mind, this should not have taken so long to fix. He believed experience and rank should solve problems quickly. As minutes passed, his frustration turned into sarcasm. He laughed loudly, breaking the tension, and made a comment that was meant as a joke but carried a sharp edge. He said something along the lines of how impossible this problem seemed, adding that if anyone could fix the engine right there and then, they would deserve a reward so ridiculous it made everyone laugh. The officers chuckled, the mechanics smiled nervously, and the soldiers standing nearby exchanged amused looks. To them, it was clear the general did not believe anyone could solve the problem on the spot. The challenge was not written down or officially announced. It was spoken casually, almost carelessly, as if the general was sure it would remain only words. To him, the broken engine was no longer just a machine. It had become a way to show authority and to remind everyone who was in charge. His laughter suggested confidence, but beneath it was annoyance. He wanted the situation to end, and he wanted it to end on his terms. Around the crowd stood many recruits, young men and women still new to military life. They watched quietly, knowing better than to speak unless spoken to. Most of them had no mechanical background, and even if they did, they would never dare step forward. Challenging a general, even indirectly, was not something a recruit would normally do. The atmosphere made it clear that this was not an invitation, but a test no one was expected to pass. The general crossed his arms and waited, clearly expecting the moment to pass without incident. He assumed the engine would eventually be towed away and repaired later. The challenge, in his mind, was just a way to release frustration and assert control. The laughter around him slowly faded, and conversations returned to quiet whispers. What no one realized at that moment was that the challenge had landed differently on one person standing at the edge of the group. While most heard a joke, that person heard an opportunity. While others felt fear or doubt, he felt focus. The general believed the situation was already decided. He believed he knew who was capable and who was not. That belief, formed in just a few careless words, set the stage for everything that followed. The broken engine was no longer just a technical problem. It had become a moment that would test pride, assumptions, and the true meaning of skill. And although the general laughed, convinced he was in control, the real challenge had only just begun. The young recruit stood a little apart from the others, close enough to see everything but far enough to remain unnoticed. His uniform was clean but slightly worn at the edges, like someone who cared more about function than appearance. While laughter and quiet comments spread through the group after the general's joke, his face stayed calm. He did not smile, and he did not look embarrassed. Instead, his eyes stayed fixed on the broken engine, studying it from a distance as if the noise around him did not exist. He was new to the base, one of the latest recruits, and had not yet found his place. Most people barely knew his name. To many officers, he was just another face in the crowd, another body in uniform. Some recruits already had reputations, good or bad, but he had neither. He spoke little, followed orders, and kept to himself. That quiet nature made him easy to overlook. What no one there knew was that before joining the military, his life had been very different. He grew up fixing things because he had to. Broken machines were not thrown away in his world, they were repaired. Old engines, damaged tools, and worn-out equipment were puzzles to solve, not problems to fear. From a young age, he learned to listen to machines, to feel their movements, and to understand when something was slightly off. Experience taught him patience, and failure taught him precision. As he stood there, memories of those long nights repairing engines came back to him. He remembered working with limited tools, relying more on understanding than strength. Compared to that, the military engine in front of him was familiar territory. He noticed small details others had missed, like the way a pipe sat slightly wrong, or how a sound earlier did not match the damage being discussed. While trained mechanics focused on complex explanations, his mind quietly traced a simpler path. Around him, other recruits whispered and joked, repeating the general's words. Some laughed nervously, others shook their heads. No one even considered stepping forward. In the military, rank mattered, and so did reputation. A recruit questioning trained mechanics and officers would normally be seen as disrespectful or foolish. The risk was high, and the reward seemed imaginary. But for him, it was not about the reward or the words spoken in laughter. It was about the engine itself. Something about the situation bothered him. He could not ignore the feeling that the problem was being overcomplicated. His hands itched with the urge to check one specific area he suspected was the cause. He knew it was a long shot, but he also knew he might be right. Still, doubt crept in. He was aware of how he was seen, or rather, not seen at all. A young black recruit, new to the base, with no visible authority, had no reason to be taken seriously. He understood the unspoken rules. Stepping forward could lead to embarrassment, punishment, or worse, being labeled as someone who did not know his place. He took a slow breath and looked around. The officers were busy talking among themselves. The general looked impatient, already turning his attention away from the engine. Time was slipping. If he did nothing, the moment would pass, and the engine would be fixed later by someone else. But if he stepped forward and failed, the laughter would be louder, and his silence would be remembered for the wrong reason. In that moment, he made a quiet decision. He reminded himself why he joined the military in the first place. It was not to hide or stay invisible. It was to prove himself through action, not words. Even if no one believed in him, he believed in what he knew. He straightened his back slightly and took one step forward, then stopped. His heart beat faster, but his face remained steady. He was not trying to impress anyone. He simply wanted a chance to look closer. Whether they laughed or listened no longer mattered. Among all the uniforms and ranks, he was still just a recruit. But inside him was knowledge built over years, waiting for the right moment. And that moment, though fragile and risky, was now standing right in front of him. The moment stretched longer than expected. The officers were still talking, the general was clearly ready to move on, and the crowd slowly began to relax, thinking the situation was over. That was when the young recruit finally made his move. It was not loud or dramatic. He did not raise his voice or wave his hand. He simply stepped forward from the line, his boots making a soft sound on the concrete floor. At first, no one noticed. A recruit stepping out of line was not supposed to happen, but the area was busy, and eyes were focused elsewhere. He took another step, then stopped, standing just close enough to the vehicle to show intention. His heart was beating hard, but his mind felt clear. He knew this was the point of no return. If he spoke now, everything could change, for better or worse. He cleared his throat quietly and asked for permission to inspect the engine. His voice was calm, respectful, and steady, but it carried enough weight to cut through the surrounding noise. The conversation stopped. Several heads turned at once. A few officers frowned, surprised that a recruit had spoken without being called. Others looked confused, trying to place who he was. The general turned slowly, clearly not expecting this interruption. He looked the recruit up and down, noticing the rank on his uniform. A slight smile appeared on his face, the kind that comes from disbelief rather than kindness. For a moment, it seemed like the request would be rejected immediately. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on everyone watching. Some recruits held their breath. They expected the general to shut the young man down, maybe even scold him for stepping out of line. Others felt second-hand embarrassment, already imagining the laughter that would follow. In their minds, this was a mistake. A big one. But instead of anger, the general laughed again. Not loudly this time, but enough for everyone to hear. He made a short comment about confidence and curiosity, clearly amused by the situation. To him, this was entertainment. He had already decided the outcome. Still smiling, he gave the recruit permission, waving his hand as if saying, "Go ahead and try." That simple gesture sent a ripple through the crowd. Some officers stepped back to make space. Others crossed their arms, ready to watch the failure they were sure would happen. The mechanics exchanged looks, unsure whether to feel offended or curious. No one expected success. The recruit walked closer to the engine, every step feeling heavier than the last. He could feel eyes on his back, judging, doubting, waiting. He ignored them. When he reached the vehicle, he did not touch anything right away. Instead, he leaned in slightly and looked. Just looked. His eyes moved slowly, taking in details others had rushed past. The noise around him faded. He focused on small things, the position of a hose, the alignment of a part, a faint smell that did not match the reported issue. He listened carefully as someone tried to start the engine again. The sound confirmed what he suspected earlier. It was not a major failure. It was something subtle. Behind him, whispers began. Some people laughed quietly, thinking he was wasting time. Others grew curious, noticing how calm he looked. He did not rush, and that alone felt different from the attempts before him. There was no panic in his movements, no show for the audience. The general watched with crossed arms, still confident that this would end quickly. In his mind, this was proof that rank and experience mattered more than boldness. The recruit's calm only added to the humor of the situation, at least from his point of view. But the recruit was no longer thinking about the general or the crowd. By stepping forward, he had already accepted the risk. Now, only the engine mattered. He reached out, finally touching the metal, feeling its temperature, checking one specific area he had noticed earlier. That single step forward had changed everything. What began as a joke had become a real test. And although no one else realized it yet, the balance of the moment was shifting. The recruit had crossed the line between being invisible and being seen, and there was no turning back. As the young recruit leaned closer to the engine, the world around him seemed to slow down. The voices behind him blended into a dull background sound, no longer clear enough to distract him. He rested one hand lightly on the metal frame, not to show confidence, but to feel it. The warmth, the slight vibration, even the smell told a story. Engines always did, if someone listened closely enough. He did not rush. That was the first thing that stood out. Everyone before him had moved quickly, flipping switches, calling out part names, and trying solution after solution. He did the opposite. He stayed still for a few seconds, studying the layout as if the engine were a map he had seen before. His eyes followed the lines of pipes and wires, stopping only when something felt wrong. A faint memory surfaced from years ago, working on an old engine that refused to start because of a simple misalignment. At the time, others had replaced parts that were not broken. Only later did he realize the real problem had been hiding in plain sight. Standing there now, that same feeling returned. The problem was not loud or obvious. It was quiet and easy to miss. Behind him, a few people whispered, wondering why he had not started working yet. To them, standing still looked like hesitation. But inside his mind, everything was moving fast. He replayed the sound the engine made earlier, matching it with what he saw. The fuel line looked fine, the main components were intact, but one connector sat slightly off. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to cause failure. He slowly reached toward it, then paused. Touching the wrong part first could send the wrong message. He knew the general and officers were watching closely, waiting for a mistake. So he double-checked his thought. He traced the connection with his eyes again, followed the path it led to, and nodded slightly to himself. When he finally moved, his actions were calm and controlled. He adjusted the connector gently, not forcing it, just guiding it back into its proper position. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable to those watching from a distance. Someone in the crowd laughed quietly, thinking this was pointless. Others leaned forward, curious about how little he was doing. He wiped his hands on his uniform, then signaled for the engine to be tested again. His voice was steady when he asked, not loud, not unsure. A mechanic hesitated, then followed the request. The key turned. For a brief moment, nothing happened. That moment felt long, heavy with expectation. Then the engine responded. At first, it coughed, as if waking from sleep. The sound was uneven but alive. The recruit raised his hand slightly, signaling for another adjustment. He made one more small correction, tightening a nearby clamp that had loosened just enough to cause trouble. Again, the movement was simple, almost too simple. The engine was tested once more. This time, it roared to life smoothly, the sound strong and steady. The vibration under the recruit's hand felt right. Balanced. Healthy. The noise filled the space, cutting through every whisper and laugh like a sharp blade. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter vanished instantly. The recruit stepped back slowly, giving the machine space, his face calm but focused. He did not smile or celebrate. To him, the result was expected. The engine had only needed understanding, not force. The general uncrossed his arms without realizing it. Officers stared at the vehicle, then at the recruit, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The mechanics looked stunned, some stepping closer to see what had been changed. They were surprised not by what he did, but by how little he did. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The same space that had been filled with jokes and doubt now held something else. Respect. Surprise. Reflection. The recruit stood quietly, waiting for instructions, his hands relaxed at his sides. He had not raised his voice or defended himself. He had let his actions speak. In that moment, everyone understood that calm focus and real skill could change everything, even in a place ruled by rank and assumptions. The sound of the engine running smoothly filled the air, steady and strong, as if it had never been broken at all. For a few seconds, no one moved. The noise itself felt unreal, almost impossible, considering how many experts had failed just moments earlier. The young recruit stood beside the vehicle, watching the engine with careful attention, not in pride, but in quiet confirmation. He listened closely, making sure there were no hidden issues, no uneven rhythms, no warning signs waiting to appear. What made the moment truly shocking was not just that the engine worked, but how it had been fixed. There were no scattered tools, no replaced parts, no long explanation. Just a few small adjustments, done with confidence and precision. People expected effort to be loud and dramatic. This had been the opposite. The general stared at the engine, his expression slowly changing. The smile he had worn earlier was gone. In its place was confusion mixed with disbelief. He took a few steps closer, as if the sound might disappear if he stayed too far away. One of the officers leaned in and asked the recruit what he had done. The recruit answered simply, pointing out the misaligned connector and the loose clamp. His words were clear and direct, without any attempt to impress. The mechanics exchanged looks, some embarrassed, others thoughtful. They examined the engine closely and realized he was right. The issue had been there all along, hidden behind complexity and assumptions. They had searched for a big failure and missed the small one that mattered most. The general cleared his throat. The entire group turned toward him, waiting to see how he would respond. Moments earlier, he had laughed and turned the situation into a joke. Now, the joke felt far away. He looked at the recruit again, this time with a different expression. Not amused, not annoyed, but curious. He asked where the recruit had learned to repair engines like that. The question itself surprised everyone. A general asking a recruit for his background was rare. The recruit answered honestly, explaining his experience before joining the military. He did not exaggerate or seek praise. He spoke the same way he worked, simply and directly. As the recruit spoke, the general listened. Truly listened. The officers noticed the change immediately. The power in the space shifted. This was no longer about rank or authority. It was about ability. The general nodded slowly, then turned to the officers and gave a short order. He wanted the recruit's records reviewed and his skills properly evaluated. The words were calm, but their meaning was clear. Something had changed. The recruit was no longer invisible. The soldiers and recruits watching felt the weight of the moment. Some felt inspired. Others felt uncomfortable, realizing how quickly they had judged. The quiet recruit they barely noticed had just done what no one else could. Not with force, but with understanding. The general walked closer and stood in front of the recruit. For a second, the air felt tense again. Then the general spoke, acknowledging the skill it took to solve the problem so quickly. It was not an apology, but it was recognition. In the military, that mattered. The engine continued to run in the background, its steady sound acting like a reminder. Every second it ran was proof. Proof that assumptions could be wrong. Proof that talent could come from unexpected places. The recruit returned to attention, waiting for further orders. He did not seek attention or celebration. He had done what needed to be done. That was enough for him. Around them, conversations slowly resumed, but the tone was different. The laughter did not return. Instead, there was quiet respect and thoughtful silence. The moment would not be forgotten. The few moves the recruit had made had done more than fix an engine. They had fixed a broken way of thinking, and everyone there knew it, even if no one said it out loud. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise ever had. Moments ago, the area had been filled with laughter, whispers, and careless confidence. Now, there was only the steady hum of the engine and the quiet breathing of the people standing around it. No one spoke. No one moved. It was the kind of silence that forces everyone to think. The general remained still, his eyes fixed on the running engine. He had seen many machines repaired in his long career, but rarely like this. Not with such ease. Not by someone he had dismissed without a second thought. The realization did not come all at once. It arrived slowly, like an uncomfortable truth settling into place. The officers around him shifted uneasily. Some cleared their throats. Others avoided eye contact, suddenly aware of how quickly they had joined the laughter earlier. They replayed the moment in their minds, remembering how certain they had been that the recruit would fail. That certainty now felt foolish. The recruit stood quietly near the vehicle, his posture straight, his expression neutral. He did not look around to see who was watching. He did not wait for praise. In his mind, the task was complete. The engine worked. That was all that mattered. But even in his calm, he could feel the change in the air. The same people who had ignored him moments earlier now saw him differently. A mechanic broke the silence by stepping closer to the engine. He checked the adjustments the recruit had made, nodding slowly as he understood what had been done. He said nothing at first, then quietly admitted that he had missed the issue. His words were not loud, but they carried weight. Admitting a mistake in front of officers and a general took courage. That admission opened the door for reflection. Another officer looked at the general, then at the recruit, clearly unsure of what to say. The general finally turned away from the engine and faced the group. His expression was serious now, stripped of humor. He spoke calmly, addressing everyone present. He reminded them that the military valued results, not assumptions. His voice was steady, but the message was clear. What had just happened was a lesson, not just a surprise. A lesson about listening, observation, and respect. The general then looked directly at the recruit. This time, there was no laughter in his eyes. He asked the recruit to explain, step by step, what he had noticed and why others might have missed it. The recruit answered clearly, breaking down his thinking in simple terms. As he spoke, people listened closely, not out of obligation, but genuine interest. The explanation was not complex. That was what made it powerful. The issue had been overlooked because everyone expected something bigger, something more dramatic. The recruit explained how experience had taught him to start small, to trust what he saw and heard instead of rushing to conclusions. His words were quiet, but they stayed with everyone who heard them. As the explanation ended, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was thoughtful, respectful. The general nodded slowly, acknowledging the logic. He did not defend his earlier joke. He did not explain himself. He simply accepted the moment for what it was. The recruits watching from the edges felt something shift inside them. They realized that speaking up, even when risky, could matter. That skill did not need permission to exist. Some felt inspired. Others felt challenged to look beyond rank and appearances. The general dismissed the group soon after, but the impact remained. As people began to leave, many glanced back at the recruit, some with admiration, others with curiosity. Conversations spread quietly across the base later that day, retelling the moment again and again. For the recruit, the silence stayed with him the longest. Not the awkward silence from before, but the meaningful one that followed success. He understood that he had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer just another recruit. He had become someone people would remember. The engine kept running long after the crowd dispersed, a steady reminder of the moment when doubt turned into respect, and silence spoke louder than laughter ever could. By the next morning, the story had already begun to spread across the base. It moved quietly at first, passed from one group to another in low voices, then grew louder with every retelling. A recruit fixing an engine that experts could not. A general left speechless. Laughter turning into respect. By the time the sun rose fully, the young recruit was no longer invisible. He noticed the change immediately. When he walked across the yard, people looked at him differently. Not with open praise, but with curiosity and quiet respect. A few soldiers nodded at him, something that had never happened before. Officers who once passed him without a glance now paused for a moment, as if trying to remember his name. Later that day, he was called into an office. The request was direct and formal, which made his heartbeat quicken. Inside, several officers sat around a table, including one he recognized from the previous day. They asked him about his background, his training, and his experience before joining the military. The questions were serious, not casual. This was not an interrogation. It was an evaluation. He answered honestly, just as he always had. He spoke about learning to repair machines out of necessity, about working long hours with limited tools, about understanding systems instead of forcing them. He did not exaggerate his skills. He did not claim to know everything. He simply explained what he knew and how he learned it. The officers listened carefully, taking notes. One of them admitted that the base had been struggling to identify certain technical talents among recruits. The military trained soldiers well, but sometimes it overlooked skills gained outside formal systems. The recruit's story was proof of that. By the end of the meeting, a decision had been made. The recruit would be reassigned to a unit where his abilities could be properly used. He would receive additional training, not as a punishment or test, but as an investment. The word sounded unreal to him. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been just another recruit standing quietly at the edge of a crowd. When he left the office, he felt a mix of pride and responsibility. Recognition felt good, but it also carried weight. He knew expectations would be higher now. Failure would be noticed just as quickly as success. Still, he welcomed it. For the first time, his skills were being seen for what they were. The general addressed the unit later that week. He did not mention names, but everyone knew who he was talking about. He spoke about judgment, about the danger of underestimating people, and about the importance of humility in leadership. Coming from someone of his rank, the message mattered. For many recruits, the story became motivation. They began to speak up more during training, to share ideas instead of staying silent. Instructors started asking different questions, paying closer attention to the quiet ones. Small changes, but meaningful ones. The recruit himself did not change much on the outside. He remained calm, focused, and respectful. But inside, something had shifted. He felt more confident, not in a loud way, but in a steady, grounded way. He had learned that his voice had value when paired with action. People still talked about the engine. Some exaggerated the story, adding details that never happened. He never corrected them. The truth was enough. The engine had been fixed. The lesson had been learned. What mattered most was not the recognition itself, but what it represented. A moment when skill broke through bias. A moment when effort spoke louder than rank. A moment when one quiet decision changed the direction of a young man's life. And as the base returned to its routines, one thing remained different. When people looked at a recruit now, they wondered what skills might be hidden behind silence. Time passed, but the moment never truly faded. Long after the engine was repaired and the attention moved on to new tasks, the story remained alive in quiet ways. It lived in conversations during late-night duties, in training sessions where instructors paused to ask one extra question, and in the way recruits looked at one another with a little more curiosity than before. What happened that day had planted a lesson deeper than anyone expected. The young recruit continued his work in his new role, surrounded by machines that needed care and understanding. He approached every task the same way he always had, with patience, observation, and respect for the system in front of him. He did not act like a hero, and he did not remind anyone of what he had done. He believed that real skill did not need constant attention. It showed itself through results, again and again. The general, too, was changed by the experience. Though he never spoke publicly about the joke he had made, those close to him noticed a difference. During inspections, he listened more and spoke less. He asked questions instead of giving quick judgments. He paid closer attention to those who stood quietly at the back of the room. Leadership, he realized, was not only about authority, but about awareness. For the base itself, the lesson became part of its culture. Instructors began encouraging recruits to share knowledge gained before enlistment. Mechanics took more time to observe before acting. Small mistakes were treated as learning opportunities instead of failures. None of these changes were written into policy, but they were felt everywhere. The recruit often thought about the moment he stepped forward. He knew how easily he could have stayed silent. Fear would have been the safer choice. Silence would have protected him from embarrassment. But silence would also have kept him invisible. That understanding stayed with him, guiding his actions long after the engine was fixed. Years later, as new recruits arrived and old ones moved on, the story was told again and again. Details changed, names were forgotten, but the core remained the same. A challenge. A laugh. A quiet person who proved everyone wrong. It became less about the engine and more about what it represented. The recruit eventually rose through the ranks, not quickly, but steadily. He earned respect the same way he earned recognition that day, through consistency and skill. When he found himself in positions of authority, he remembered how it felt to be underestimated. He made sure not to repeat the same mistake. When faced with problems, he encouraged others to speak, especially those who hesitated. He knew that the best answers often came from unexpected places. He understood that leadership was not about being the loudest voice, but about hearing every voice. The repaired engine became just another machine in service, eventually replaced by newer models. But the lesson it carried remained stronger than steel. It taught that talent does not announce itself. That intelligence does not always wear confidence on its sleeve. That respect must be earned, but opportunity must be given. In the end, the story was not about a promise made in laughter or a challenge thrown carelessly. It was about the power of quiet confidence and the courage to step forward when it matters most. It was about how one small action can reshape thinking, change systems, and open doors that once seemed locked. And so, the lesson lived on, passed from one generation to the next, reminding everyone who heard it that greatness often stands quietly, waiting for someone to notice, or for the courage to be seen.